Everybody has that one game in their collection or one game that they've played throughout their lives that really means a lot to them. And I don't really know why it means a lot to anybody really, or why it means so much to me, or why certain games mean so much to other people. Let's be real, it makes no sense. Nostalgia is a funny thing. You look back with rose-colored glasses, and it doesn't genuinely make a whole lot of sense. Because sometimes you go back to these games, and they're not that good, the graphics suck, the gameplay isn't what you remembered. Quite honestly, sometimes you play it for 5 minutes and you go, what the heck was this all about? I'm going to get my rant over. This is my game. This is the greatest game in my collection. Not because it's the most valuable, not because it's the greatest game ever made, but because it's the best game that I've ever played and it's the most nostalgic for me. I've had this copy of Final Fantasy IX since probably 2001. I think right when it came out. I received it for Christmas from my nonna, actually. And it was underneath a sweater. So it was in a package, opened it up, found this sweater, and underneath that was this game. And it was sealed. It was ready to go, brand new back in the day for the PS1. But the funny thing is I actually didn't have a PS1 back in the day growing up. I only had a PS2. So I think I was like maybe 10 years old. I had no idea what this game even was. I didn't know what Final Fantasy was. To me, it didn't really mean much. So I put it aside and it just sat there for years. And then honestly, one day I just decided to pick it up, probably somewhere in 2003 to 2005. And quite honestly, I never really looked back. Nostalgia is pretty funny. It's interesting because it really kind of shaped the way I view video games. This game specifically holds a special place just because of the elements attributed to it. First off, it's a role-playing game, which I love. It's got turn-based battle, active turn-based battle, which is, in my opinion, probably the coolest part about classic Final Fantasy. And it really, it had a great story. It was just, everything about it was phenomenal. But the really interesting part is how those certain memories from when you're a kid really hits home when you're older. And now I'm in my 30s. I played this game when I was maybe 10, 11, 12 years old. And it's so interesting to me how I can look back so fondly with this game. And even today, I can still pick up this game at any time, play it with no problem. And I could play for hours. I could start a new game. I enjoy it just as much today as I did back then. Yeah, sure, there's a couple things that are not as great. The battles are a little slow. The graphics aren't as great. But that point in time when I was 10 to 12 years old was such a pivotal moment in just, I don't know, and just your development as a person, development in what you enjoy, and then you start to really formulate what you like. Growing up, I only had I shouldn't say I only had, but I had a Nintendo, a Super Nintendo, and an N64, eventually a PS2. So I had all the game systems growing up. But it was very interesting too because I very distinctly remember having a copy of Final Fantasy 1 for the NES. Now, I actually have a complete in-box copy of it, which is probably the coolest thing in my entire collection. It's unbelievable because it has that nostalgic element from when I was a kid because my dad had this game and I, through life, ended up getting the copy. So it was subsequently getting the copy, getting the Nintendo, getting everything. So it's just interesting. I don't know if this rant makes any sense. It's probably like the most long-winded thing, and I really didn't know what I was going to say before I made this video, but I really wanted to get it out there that nostalgia is so funny. Everybody has a game. Everybody has something from their childhood that they distinctly remember that is so iconic that you can look back on and think, this game can do no wrong. This is the best thing ever. And no matter what, it will hold that special place in your heart. The game meant so much to me that I actually found a sealed copy on eBay about a couple of years ago. But Yes, it is greatest hits. It is sealed though, and it's a Squaresoft copy, which is interesting because when they merged with Square Enix a few years later, they were still selling these copies on their website up until just a few years ago. So you could buy a PS1 Greatest Hits Final Fantasy IX Square Enix sealed copy from the Square Enix website just up until a few years ago. But what makes this interesting is that it's a Squaresoft copy, which makes it more, I guess, rare, valuable. But that's why I wanted it, because it seemed to be going a little bit cheaper than what an actual black label sealed copy would go for. So I figured I would compromise with this. I haven't seen one show up on eBay since because a lot of the sold comps go with the Square Enix version. So keep that in mind. If you're ever looking for sealed copies of old Final Fantasy or even Squaresoft games, look for that Squaresoft. Don't pick up the Square Enix version because it's probably newer. It's not as rare, and you're going to be spending probably a little bit too much money than you should be. Playing a game like that can make you go back and revisit the classics too. Like, for example, I've got a complete in-box version of Final Fantasy III, which is pretty cool. Nostalgia's funny. It's a fickle thing. It's interesting. You go back, you can really revisit these old classics with, I guess, rose-colored glasses. But it doesn't mean they're good. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they're so iconic and so important to that moment in time for you as a person. And I don't know if that sounds cringe or whatever, but it's pretty cool to think that, hey, I played this game when I was like 10 to 12 years old, and it shaped my game collection. It shaped how I view games. It shaped how I look back on games. And it shaped certain moments in my life when I received that copy from my nonna, when I played Final Fantasy with my dad back in the day, when I started collecting video games for the first time and realized, hey, this is pretty cool. I can collect these old games and actually enjoy it. So if that makes any sense at all, that is the most iconic game in my collection. Final Fantasy IX. This is my original copy. It's beat up. Disc is loose. Everything's destroyed. It's a Canadian copy too. Anyways, pretty cool stuff. I'll see you in the next one.